Hey everyone, and welcome to the 8-Figure Agent Podcast. My name is Jared Larsen, and I'm joined by my co-host Matt Walker, CEO of Swivel, the world's most flexible financial services CRM. Our mission is to build community, a community where we can empower each other to achieve remarkable success in the financial sector. Join Matt and me every week as we will motivate you to reach new heights in your career and unlock your full potential. Reaching your next level of success starts now. Hey, welcome back to the 8-Figure Agent. My name's Jared Larsen alongside Matt Walker. Today, we're going to dive deep into what's called the line of acceptability, and we're going to really focus on standards, and there's so much to unpack, but I'm going to kick us off with a quote, Matt, and I want to get your feedback on what you think of it. Not having a standard is a standard.
Yeah, I love that. The idea that a line doesn't exist is in essence creating a line, right? Someone always has a standard. You always have a spot of what you consider good or bad. It's in everything from morality to business practices to, your efforts and energies. If you say there's good and there's bad, there's a line.
Yeah. Well, and it makes me think of another quote, actually. Nick Saban, I think it was Nick Saban, who I think is probably one of the most arguably talented collegiate coaches ever to coach the game. He had a statement that said, "The way you do one thing is the way you do everything." And I think about this, and there's some gut check there.
Yeah.
There's some gut check. How do you wake up in the morning? Do you pop right out of bed or do you hit the snooze? Is your car messy or clean? Is it right? And you start thinking about the way I do one thing. Well, you don't get a cheat. That shows up in your life over and over again. And I think about it with these standards. If you don't have standards, then you're going to be whimsically led to wherever life wants to lead you. And you're never going to have this ability to reroute yourself into what it is you're trying to achieve. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
I want to talk, let's maybe define a little bit about this concept of above the line and below the line. So when I think of like, what are those old charts? Remember in math back in the day?
Yeah.
They had these
Your
like,
XY axis.
yeah, XY axis. I obviously failed that class. If it was geometry or algebra, I don't know. But okay, so we have this theory that standards are a level of acceptability. We say my standard is X, right? And this is going to be acceptable. So on that old school math chart here, we're going to have a line, and that line of acceptability really relates to your standards. Whatever your standards are your standards around lead generation? Are your standards around annual reviews? Are your standards around, I don't know what you're going to choose to be your standard, but let me share with you above and below the line. When you're performing at a level higher than your standards, you're operating above the line. When you're operating below your standards, you're operating at below the line. And I think that this is a principle we've got to understand, but not only understand it, we got to be honest with ourselves. At what point? Well, first of all, if you don't have standards, this is irrelevant. Throw that away because you've never established your line. So let's talk about standards, Matt, and just establishing your line in our industry.
Yeah. I mean, as you were saying that, one of the things that crossed my mind, and then I want to answer exactly what you're talking about, but one of the things that answered or that came to my mind was this concept of when you don't have a standard, you can say yes to anything, and it's hard to say no to anything as
Mm.
well. So, standard can be this is what we do in our business, and this is what we don't do. This is how we help clients. This is how we don't help clients. And when people don't have an answer for that, what they end up doing is they end up spending 80% of their time on things they should have said no to. And if you're an advisor or an agent, someone in our business, you know exactly what I'm talking about. It's the one off case that you take off, to help this person and it wastes your time. You don't give them the service they really wanted to begin with. You can never make them happy. You just need to know what to say no to. And so, defining that all around is a critical part to success. And if I go and talk to these 8-figure agents and these business owners, these entrepreneurs, they are very clear on what they do and what they don't do. And I've actually found they're more prideful in what they don't do.
Mhm.
Oh, I don't do any of that stuff.
Yeah.
They know exactly what it is. So it goes back to who am I? Who am I not? This is what our business does. And I personally feel like if you're a person starting out, you kind of feel like I'm going to talk to anyone who breathes. You
Yeah.
know, we've talked to more successful people. That approach is t- be be very clear in what you do and very clear who you do it with. And that will add to way more success than, hey, if you breathe, I want to meet with you as a financial planner. And start your career out the way. Those who are in the business for a long time, you should be meeting with your staff, your group, your organization, and always defining who we are and who we aren't and checking yourself every year on that so everyone lives into those standards of what you do and what you don't do.
Yeah. I think it's so intriguing because standards, you know, I had to get rocks, bruises, scrapes, and thorns to start figuring out, oh man, I should probably have a standard around that or some sort of a process around that. Like I was just trying to fill that out. But some of these old timers that have been there, done that, they have standards. Some of the standards maybe they created, some of the standards they learned, but the end result was they clearly understand their standards and here's the question I want to pose to the community really. Think about this. Currently in your situation, if I were to hire one individual tomorrow, I was to hire them and they were to come on, and maybe even I had a 3x5 note card that I could write, ask them, write all your standards, deliver all your standards to them, tell them what they need to live into, tell them who we are as an organization, tell them how we treat customers, tell them how we lead generate, tell them how we process paperwork and files and we get it to the finish line, tell them how we celebrate wins, tell them all of these business avenues or aspects, those are standards. And so if we can't communicate that, maybe that's just a question or a way that we can kind of work through an exercise. Does that make sense, Matt?
Oh, perfect. Yeah.
Obviously, there are achievers and there are steady pacemakers, and there are some people that are procrastinators and that struggle. So as I'm bumping around and I'm trying to live into my standards, sometimes I'm high flying and I'm living above the line. Let's talk about this though. I'm in a cycle. I know we've talked about this in other podcasts, this cycle of going through wins and losses and struggles. When I drop below the line, what do I do? How do I get unstuck from dropping below the line?
Yeah. So, when we have a lot of high performers, they're very goal oriented in our industry. So I have to write a certain amount of premium. I'm going to close so many policies. I'm going to bring on so many clients. I'm going to make so many calls. So much of our business is this like quota driven. Now, whether it's your organization doing it or you're doing it internal, it's there, it's happening. And so there's the type of advisor agent person who can self regulate that. And they say, okay, I haven't written the premium I'm supposed to do. Now what? I haven't made the calls I was supposed to make. Now what? And it takes a special person to be able to say, okay, I haven't done enough calls. I haven't done this activity or whatever it may be, and to know what you have to do to hit those numbers. And usually it requires not going home. Usually that's the case. Usually it just means a little bit more hours. Sometimes it's bigger. But when that happens, I think that it's a good thing to say, okay, if I'm not hitting these, then what? I say go home because that's mine. Mine has always been like, once I get these numbers, I can finally go home.
Yeah.
When I first started in the business, it was how many calls do I have to make before I can go home? And then once I was good at that, how many appointments do I have to set before I go home? Then it was how much closes do I have to get before I go home? And then it changes as your business progresses. But if you're living to that standard, that makes the difference. And it kind of reminds me, there's a book out there called Well Done. I don't know have you heard of that book?
I have not.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the principle's simple on how they get orca whales to jump out of the water. And what they do first is they put a bar underneath the water, and as the the giant killer whale swims above that bar, they give him a little, piece of fish. And the fish is pretty smart. The giant killer whales go, wow, if I go above this bar, I get more food. And so what they do is they slowly start raising it. But before that bar is out of the water, it starts under the water. No one makes money in our business
Yeah.
by making phone calls.
Brilliant.
You make money by selling policies, helping people, all those things. But you got to start somewhere. And I feel like phone calls, appointments, activity is the bar being underneath the water. And eventually you get it to where you're putting it out and you're jumping out of the water and you're amazing everyone on, how you can get out of the water.
Yeah. I want to speak to maybe a little bit different angle of this. So as we talk about going below the line, Number one, and this is hard to do, right? You got to be honest with yourself when you're living below the line. And so I think the first step for listeners is to say, okay, hey, I'm not performing like I said I would. I'm living below the line. And then we go below the line. And two things can happen. You can stay living below the line. You can go further below the line, deeper, and you may choose to operate somewhere down here. The danger in that is if you do it for long enough, you set a new standard, and the standard is here. It's lower. And so the reality is, I maybe some advice I would like, some coaching advice that I'd like to give. Number one, recognize that you're operating below the line. Number two, identify the roadblocks that are standing in your way from getting back to your standards. We don't move the goalposts, right? I'm not giving you permission to reset the standard down here. What I'm saying is identify those roadblocks so that you can come back up to our standards.
So, as you're saying that, I'm going to say I don't know if I agree.
Okay.
Um, uh, so you're not making sales, and your bar has raised to where it's not the phone calls, it's not the appointments. You're just trying to hit a premium number, and that was you have enough appointments that you should be closing. You should be doing something, but you've fallen behind that, and all of a sudden you're behind it for a week, 2 weeks, and you're kind of getting in this rut. Well, do you keep the bar there? Or do you say, okay, I need a new standard of what I need to do so I can get working on raising that bar again? Maybe now I'm focusing on appointment set and I'm just going to control what I can control and get more appointments. So I don't know, sometimes I think that there are times where you can lower that bar, but understand I don't think that's the solution the whole time. But I think that, I don't know, what are your thoughts
Yeah.
on that?
No, yeah, I'm thinking through this now. I think there's an application where maybe you could lower the bar, or maybe instead of lowering the bar, the way I'm trying to interpret what you're saying is start creating some steps that you can create a win streak to get
To get
back
back
up
up
to a
there.
standard. Like, but I said that a standard was important enough. Are you going to abandon your standards? Well, here's the challenge. If you don't have standards, when you get stuck or when you're living below the line, where do you turn to? How do you get unstuck? Where do you drive your business? And so this is the challenge is business owners and entrepreneurs get into this cycle and it's like, man, I'm really in a slump. I'm in my bad streak. I just don't know what to do. Well, just keep doing what you're doing faster, harder, and more of it. And you're doing the wrong things and the wrong activities with no standards. And man, I'm passionate about this part. You have standards so that when you're below the line, you can root yourself back in the standard, right? And you're able to find momentum to get back there and get into a win streak, right?
Yeah. And I think that's really high when we talk about standards of who we're going to be and what we do as an organization. And yeah, you're spot on. I remember a time where I was talking to one of the most successful agents advisors that I know, and it was early on, about 15 years ago, where I was starting to have some success. And success for me meant if I'm not writing business every day, I'm failing. And I'm trying to get $100,000, $200,000 a day in premium, and you go 2 or 3 days where you only do 10 and then zero and then zero. And now you're like 3 days at zero. And I'm like, man, how do you get yourselves out of that rut? And I'm talking to a guy who's doing, at the time by himself, $30 million of production. And I was like, how do you do that? How do you get out of there? And he's like, well, you just go sell one more and you get out of it. And I was like, that's the dumbest answer. I'm like, what are you really doing? And he's like, no, no, you just sell and you get out of it. And so I just remember kind of being frustrated with the answer and being like, okay, well, and I think that the key is that if you have those standards of what you are and who you're doing and taking care of the people, that those standards are at a level that will raise and bring you back to those cells. So instead of having to feel like you have to fall down or drop your standards, I think this is what you're talking
Yeah.
about is if you can keep my standards of these are my activities, these are the things that I do, that will always bring you back to those standards
Yeah.
or that success and getting to sell again.
That's it. And birds of a feather flock together. If you're struggling,
Yeah.
right, you may become a little bit more negative, but I hope that maybe what I'm saying is successful people live above the line and they live below the line. There's no diamond in the rough that's consistently achieving at such a high level. They never have a bad day and they're always above the line. But the reality is the difference between good and great is they found a way to consistently live above the line more of the time, live above their standards, equal to their standards, or above their standards more often than not.
Yeah, so that self-motivation to stay above the standards, that's the part where we talk about, like, can you really teach that? Can you really have a person is like a personality that's like, "I will not live below my standards. I'm gonna be above that. I'm always gonna be that kind of person." And, I don't know if you can train that, hire that, teach that. Um, I would hope that any successful and at least what we found is we've talked to agents all over the country, those who are successful, you're right, they are up above that. Where it gets interesting is when you're a business owner or practitioner, as we talked about before, and you're responsible for people below you. This is where it gets interesting.
Oh, I love this.
So, Jared, this I turn it to you. This is an area you've had a lot of success in helping and coaching people. How do you help your employees? You create this standard of accountability. First of all, do you create that line for them? Because personally, you create it for yourself as an entrepreneur. Now what? What about the rest of your team? Do you kind of talk about that together? Do you force it upon them? Do they force it upon themselves? How do you handle that?
Whoa, doggy. This is a loaded question. This is awesome. I love it. So here's the challenge. And Matt, I want you to laugh, agree, whatever, disagree. The reality is high achievers set standards and they more often than not achieve the standard. The challenge or the challenge of an achiever with standards is they expect everybody around them to do what? Live up to that standard,
Yeah.
that same standard. And so not everybody's like me. Not everybody's going to operate like me. So I think it's encouraging as we have a group of people. I've hired employees and agents and sub agents, and I have all whatever, I don't know. As we bring them on, just thinking that they're going to adopt my standards, that's a big miss right away. It's a big miss. Now, what I'm not saying is my company values and the standards we've adopted as a company. That's not what I'm talking about. But what I'm talking about is I hire on new people. There's something that is so critical. You've got to sit down with those individuals. You need to understand what's important to them. You need to have them have a voice at the table on what those standards would look like so that it will allow them buy-in as they're working towards achieving these standards. Now, certainly you can guide and steer them to make sure they're hitting standards that are appropriate, and there may be a few that we just have to give to them. But there is such tremendous value as you're building an organization from a leadership standpoint is to get their feedback, collaborate with them, allow them to develop the standards. Look, man, if you're going to dump a bunch of standards down someone's throat and they're living below the line, so what? This is what they're saying. So what? I'm living below your standard, Matt.
Yeah.
And that's the culture that you're going to get. That's the culture that you're going to breed rather than collaborating and allowing them to say, this is important to me. This is a standard that I can buy into. And you know what? I'm going to commit to live to that standard, Matt.
There's a consultant that we've worked with in the past, and he's a very successful C-suite consultant. Um, and he talks a little bit about kind of this concept of how do you get an employee to live to this line of accountability. And I've never had an interview where someone's like, actually, you know what? Those aren't my standards. Every single one of them are like, yep, that's who I am. And what they've done is they've committed already that are part of your organization, as far as those standards and what they fit to. So, then the rest of the stuff of the personal stuff that fits into that, that's that unique part of like how you bring it all together. So if I was talking to a successful financial shop right now, and I was to go in and say, hey, I want to do some consulting, take you guys to the next level. The area that I would start, and by the way, the reason that I'm saying this is I'm trying to take a little thunder from Jared. Jared actually, as a consultant, came into our practice and did this. And he said, what are your standards? And we didn't have the same standards. We were all over the place. We couldn't tell you what they were, and mission and vision help propel those standards. But writing those standards down, getting on the same page was critical. And then as we hired people, we brought them in to those standards. And, as our listeners are sitting there, if you're a self person just by yourself, then great. Think about this personally. But if you have one staff member, I would ask yourself, what are our standards? What do we do? What do we don't do? And just make it that vague because you'll be amazed what answers you get from everyone else.
Yeah, and I think that there's company standards, there's interdepartmental standards,
Yep.
then there's individual standards. And so this isn't like this kumbaya, one approach will fit everything. Let me give you an example. And I love your interview example, Matt, because I bring on, I'm quote unquote hiring an agent, a sales agent that's going to come on. And let's be honest, they're going to be green. They're just starting out. So what are we going to do? Well, we're going to have to pick the phone up. So I hire someone on and I'm like, hey, Matt, oh man, I love you. You're a really great fit. Hey, here's what we're going to do. We're going to just have to work really hard you're gonna have to make a few phone calls and stuff, and there's gonna be, you're gonna have to knock on some doors, and you're gonna have to follow up on some leads and stuff. Are you in? And he's like, yeah, I'm in.
Yeah. And
And Matt starts that job, and guess what happens? It's a train wreck because when hard meets hard, what's he realigning himself with?
yep. And I love when you interview the business owner and the agent in that spot. The agent in that spot is like, no one gives me any direction around here.
Yep.
And you interview the agent or the business owner or the practitioner or whatever, and they say, I don't know what the deal was. When I was his age or when I was her age, I did this, this, and this, and that's how I do it. And he will never do any of those things. She will never do any of those things. And it's like this total misalignment of like, well, no wonder they're not successful. I don't even know why I have them around. They don't get anything done.
Yeah, and here's a fallacy too, Matt. Let's say I know you're a high achiever. If you're interviewing me, more often than not in interviews, you will actually project your achiever on them. Oh yeah, he's a great person, loves it. He'll work as hard as me. He'll do what I do. I didn't communicate standards, but no worries, Matt will get that, right? Rather than interviewing and say, "Hey Matt, I just want to be really clear up front. This job is a sales agent. Here's our standards and I want you to commit yes or no. And it's okay if it's no, then that's okay. We're not a right fit and let's part ways. Number 1, 125 phone calls a day, 15 emails, 5 Facebook posts, X number of direct messages, X number of mailers and knock on 10 doors. Are you in yes or no? That's different.
It's totally different.
And now what I've done is I've set the standard or the bar from which I can help hold Matt accountable to win, not to lose. I don't hold people accountable to lose. I hold them accountable to help them win. And Matt said yes to that. So each day I can say, hey, Matt, how'd we do on our 125 calls? Hey, how'd we do on this? How'd we do on that? It looks like you fell below the line in a couple areas. What do we need to do to get you back up? And now I can real time manage. I can real time coach these people for success rather than crap. Matt's not hitting
Yeah.
his number. I don't want to have that conversation.
You know what? I'm having this epiphany right now of something that I wish I had done. We did that. We totally did that when we hired all those Medicare supplement agents over the years. And even some of my annuity agents, I did that. What I didn't do is say, here's the standard I will live in to help you.
Oh,
And I will do this, this, and this. If I do these 3 things, will it empower you to be able to do these things and get that commitment right up front? Because a lot of times things would break through, it wouldn't happen, and they'd say stuff like, well, I did my job, but you never got me X, Y, and Z. And then the complaints start happening. And, I wish I had gone back and, we churned through a lot of agents through that business. And I think that if we had done that one thing, if we do this, can you do this
yeah.
right up front?
Yeah, your standard is so important. I think about this agent that could potentially be struggling. You asked the question earlier about standards and, I can't remember how you phrased it, but at the end of the day, if they don't have a mission or if you haven't uncovered what's really important to them, and we've talked about mission on past podcasts,
Yeah.
and it's the why you do what you do. If you haven't found what's important to them truly, then them living into standards is going to be really challenging because why would I want to live into standards? What am I shooting for? What's my end game? Like, I get it, Matt. I do want to be successful, but I don't even know why I want to be successful. So for hitting the standards, it's not that important to me.
Yeah,
Does that resonate?
absolutely. Um, and I'm just share my personal one, and I've shared it before, but it's to build enthusiastically with love and purpose. That is my personal mission. And, just to give people an idea of how I tie that into my personal standards is one of that part of building enthusiastically with love and purposes is relationships. I build relationships. And so then I have standards of how I build relationships. And they can be, moral and family centered, like simple things like my wife trusts me at all times. So some of my standards are I never have female in the opposite sex in my home alone.
Yep.
That's kind of like an extreme one of like that is a standard that I set, but it leads into my mission
Yes.
of building enthusiastically with love and purpose. And it ties all the way into my business with my clients. So if this is my personal mission, the client relationship is very high. It's something that I would say, there's things that we do really well because that's my standard, and the standard is high relationships with customers. And so we've built that, and that's a part of what we do. And I have a bunch of rules on how we keep those high relationships, from, how often we do annual reviews, so how often they get called, how often we do client events, to make sure that clients get hit so many times a day so they know I'm connected and that I care. Um, their ease of access to their information they have. I need to make sure that they can, with a click of a button, see everything that they need. This is the standard I set, so any client that comes in knows that I am building a relationship of trust, of success, and I build all those things around it.
Success leaves clues. You're not happen chancing into success,
Yeah.
right? You're not just hoping. And I'm going to share a story about me that I hope will illustrate this point. I love soccer. I played it growing up, and that converted into me like not being able to give it up because I have this addiction to the sport. So I decided, well, what will I do? I'll go into coaching. So I started coaching actually Matt's alma mater, Boise High School, with a dear friend of mine, Mike Darrow. And we jumped in and we just jumped in. And I was 19 years old or 20 years old, somewhere around there. This is 20 something years ago. And I thought, I will be the best coach. I'm a great player. Like, I got this. I'm really humble too, apparently. But
Yeah.
I'm going to go start coaching these kids. And so I show up, and what I thought coaching was going out there and playing with the kids and showing them how good I was and showing them the different
Yeah.
techniques and tactics I could have. And Mike was the same way. And we got into scrimmages quickly, and we didn't work on any sort of functionality or training or what's it called, calisthenics or anything where we're trying to increase their stamina and that conditioning component that I just missed. And I did that for 7 years, and we were okay. I think we mainly had winning seasons, but not great. And I think we had one season at our low point where we were 500.
Mm.
I remember sitting down with Mike one evening and we said, dude, something's got to change. Like we're doing the same thing over and over again. Let's change it. And I remember that year we tryouts were totally different. They were structured. We had standards. We set rules for engagement. We told boys that they would show up on time, and if they didn't show up on time, then here's what would happen and how we're going to start practicing. And what happened at first was I became the most hated man on the planet by these young kids. And I'll illustrate that by over the next 7 years, we won 5 district titles and 4 state titles.
Hmm.
Something like that. Mike will have to correct me on the numbers, but we won 4 state championships. And the first year that we won the state championship, this is what happened. One of the captains stood up at the end and said, hey, I just want to, I want to tell everybody that at the beginning of this year, I absolutely hated Coach Jared and Coach Mike. I hated them so bad. They made us run. They made us condition. They worked out. They had structure. They had consequences. They had this. They had that. But I have learned more this year, and it's been the greatest year of
Yeah.
my life. And I hope that this hits home. If you're just shotgun approaching, going out there and hoping that you're going to run hard and fast and find wins, you're going to find some wins and you're going to have some success. But if you're playing the long game, you got to have standards and you got to have accountability and you got to be able to move through that. And it was no doubt in that dynasty that Mike and I had created those last 7 years of my coaching at Boise High.
Well, I mean, that goes right into our business, right? I mean, what does every uh, business person in the financial service industry do? As soon as you have your most talented agent, you move them into management.
Dun dun
And then all of a
dun.
sudden they want a player coach, in there, and they're the cool guy or gal helping people out.
Let me show you how good I am,
Yeah, let
right?
me show you. And it's just, I mean, until you can find a way to actually coach through standards and accountability, it works. And I would say with FMOs and IMOs, the same thing happens. Most FMOs and IMOs have a little bit of an advantage because most of their marketers aren't successful agents. They're just coming in as coaches. And I think that that's one thing that FMOs and IMOs, well, they got a lot of things right, but that's one thing I think that just they naturally fall into. Um, but if you're part of an organization building a business, be aware of that. Don't take your best managers and make them player coaches. Make them coaches, and that's a definitely a key part of things to take into consideration. And it's one of those that if you're doing that, reach out to me personally. I mean, this from a guy who's gone through it and would have done a couple things differently. Come talk to me because that's how you can get the most out of your agents is being a true coach with standards and accountability.
Yeah. I love that concept of the player's coach versus the coach that coaches the player. And oftentimes it requires some sort of energy, coaching, or training to help them in that transition or shift.
Yeah.
Well, Matt, okay, so as we leave, I know we love to give value. I want to talk to you about some tips and recap the line of acceptability and what we can really do to continually be gauging our level of standards and our accountability. And the first is number one, if you're a listener and you don't have standards, identify them.
Yep.
And just start simple. Like you don't need to identify 500. If you started by identifying one, you're going to be better off. Then once you've identified your standard, you need to know if you're operating above or below the line. And you've got to be real with yourself. And look, if you're not honest with yourself enough, I know if I ask Matt, Matt's going to shoot me straight. He's going to tell me, hey, man, you're operating below the line. And he'll call me out. He'll call me up, actually, is what we talk about. He calls me up. The third thing is identify what's getting in the way of you living into that standard. And you've got to identify that so that you can start creating those incremental steps you were talking about, Matt, to get back to that line. And number four is the piece that I don't know if people have the courage to do, but it's make change.
Yeah.
It's like when you're down there, find the gumption that you need to make change. And then five, commit to showing up. Commit to showing up and living. And I can guarantee that if you start doing this, I'm not guaranteeing you any results that you'll always be above the line. I'm going to tell you, I can commit to you, you're going to fall below the line. But this is a process. This is a cycle that will help you get unstuck. So Matt, close us out with your final thoughts on standards and what you feel and what they can do for our listeners as they live into this.
Yeah. I mean, I wish I had this one thing to say that would make everyone like listen to this podcast, pull out a piece of paper, and just start writing down the standards. Um, but if you're going to want to make a difference in your life, that's what you need to do. Jared, maybe what we can do is do a quick video, depending upon what, people's demands are here. I'll just walk through my mission and my standards of our business with our staff, and we can just do kind of how our staff and how I've done it in our own personal business and how we live into that. And, maybe that template would be enough for people to want to go do that themselves.
Yeah, I think that's awesome. So Matt, what I'm hearing you say, if there's enough interest, guys, let us know in the community, and Matt and I would be happy to shoot a video, even if it's a little slight mission training, if it's standards training, and even getting into the weeds of showing you what we have. I can promise you, as you identify your standards and you work diligently to live above the line, you'll find greater success in your business. Thanks for joining us today. Thank you so much for hanging out with us today. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to subscribe and follow us on your preferred platform wherever you listen to podcasts. Remember, success loves company, so share this podcast with someone who you think might enjoy it too, and let's build a community together. Let's keep the momentum going until the next episode drops. And hey, if you've got any questions or topic ideas that you would like us to focus on, send us a message on social media. Again, thanks so much for joining us. Until next time.